Welcome to Sparrow's Realm.
From the moment General Renard of Eldoria first set eyes on my older sister, Celeste, everything started to change for our family. He was the kind of man built out of battle posture, straight as a blade, eyes bright like firelight, carrying that quiet intensity you only see in people who've lived too long among war and victory. That same energy drew people in, but Celeste, calm, composed, and always in control, met his fire with her cool serenity. She was our father's greatest joy, our mother's perfect reflection, poised, beautiful, and so self-aware of her own charm it could almost hurt to watch. That midsummer banquet was the night it began. Renard had just returned from the frontier, dressed in his dark military uniform trimmed with gold. The emperor himself had praised him weeks before for suppressing some border uprising, and the stories of his unbroken streak in battle had spread through every gathering in the capital. Yet, when he finally stood in front of Celeste, her jasmine-scented sleeves brushing her wrists under the lantern glow, he went absolutely silent. People swore that when he bowed, his eyes lingered a heartbeat too long. And though Celeste pretended to ignore it, everyone saw her composure ignite something in him like a challenge he couldn't walk away from. By the time autumn came, Renard sent his first marriage proposal. And somehow, along with it, came a promotion for our father from just another mid-level bureaucrat to the deputy minister of rights. A coincidence? Hardly. The servants whispered Renard had pulled some strings, convincing one of the high commanders to recognize father's excellent service. Our mother didn't ask questions. She only smiled the way women do when power and romance intertwine and said, "Fate always rewards those who inspire love." But fate, where Celeste was concerned, wasn't a gift she ever accepted easily. Renard didn't give up. You could practically measure my father's career by the rhythm of Renard's proposals, each year another, each one grander than the last. The first came with pearls and silk, the next, with fine tea from the empire's farthest corners, after that, a white horse fit for the emperor's court. Every present glittered brighter than the last. And every time Celeste refused him, father's fortune climbed yet again. It would have been called a fairy tale if not for my sister's pride. "Soldier smell of sweat and vanity," she once said, sitting by the lily pond, combing that dark, mirror-smooth hair of hers. "How could I live with the sound of marching boots echoing through my home? I want a poet, someone who writes beauty instead of spilling blood." Mother tried gently to reason with her. "A general's wife carries influence and respect. You'd be admired, Celeste. You'd be safe." "Safe?" Celeste said softly, watching her reflection ripple and break. "Safety's just another kind of prison. Only prettier." Still, Renard didn't falter. When he visited, his presence filled our courtyard like silent thunder, a storm held in check. The gifts he brought could have outfitted a royal estate: dragon-etched shields, indigo fabrics, lacquer boxes carved from cinnabar. But none of that glitter mattered as much as the man himself. There was something about the way he looked at Celeste, not possessive, not desperate. Reverent. Like he saw something sacred he was willing to wait for forever. His letters were never arrogant either. I would listen outside father's study as they read them, words about loyalty, patience, and honor. His persistence became almost poetic. By the third year, his ninth proposal came with a gift that stole the breath from everyone: a jade hairpin veined with gold that caught light like it was woven from sunlight itself. It wasn't just a token, it was a vow turned to art. "Jade," father said, admiring it, "represents purity and endurance. The general values meaning as much as wealth." Celeste lifted it to her temple and smiled faintly. "It's lovely," she murmured, and then, just as calmly, pushed it into her hair and turned away. "But tell him no." The silence that followed cracked like thin ice. Father's patience splintered. "He has knelt before you 9 times, he said sharply. 9. He honors you above all else, and you repay him with scorn? His favor keeps us safe, prosperous. Does your pride outweigh our future?" Celeste tilted her head, unbothered. "Must my life be traded like a promotion?" The next few days were unbearable. No one dared speak above a whisper. Mother wept behind closed doors. Renard left quietly, giving a single bow at our gate before riding off. That's when I noticed how tired his eyes were, for the first time, and, strangely, it stirred something in me I didn't yet understand. Years passed. The gifts stopped. The promotion stopped. Father became restless. Celeste kept her poets and her praise, but her gatherings brought more flattery than purpose. And me? I stayed quiet, listening, observing, learning how opportunity looks when it passes others by. One summer night, as the cicadas hummed and Celeste sat arranging her verses, I found myself watching that jade hairpin gleam in her hair, the same one Renard had given her. The one she never valued. That was when the thought came, daring and dangerous all at once: if she couldn't see the worth of what she'd been given, maybe I could. It struck me like lightning, brief, certain, impossible to forget. Celeste had refused her general 9 times. Father's patience burned out completely. By then, even the servants whispered as if our family's fortune were a ship taking on water. That night is burned into my memory: warm air thick with jasmine, gold lanterns swaying, Celeste seated before her bronze mirror. The jade pin flashed in her hair as she checked her reflection, beautiful, flawless, untouchable. Father's going to be furious, I said from the doorway. Let him, she replied lazily. Fury's better than submission. She wore defiance the way other women wore perfume, rich, heady, impossible to miss. And I, the quiet younger sister, looked at her and felt something shift inside me. Maybe envy. Maybe resolve. Father soon entered, his anger precise and heavy. Enough, he said. General Renard's loyalty shames us. If Celeste won't marry him, she'll at least acknowledge what his devotion has done for us. Celeste didn't even glance up. Are we to be auctioned off for gratitude? Gratitude builds stability, he shot back. Spoken like a child who's never known hunger. The air went still. Even Mother's breathing sounded loud. Celeste lifted her chin, unyielding, and in the mirror's reflection, I saw my own face beside hers, so similar, almost interchangeable. That's when the idea bloomed fully. Father, I heard myself say, my pulse hammering, if my sister won't marry him, then I will. The room fell silent. Mother gasped. Celeste turned, disbelief cutting through her perfect calm. You, she murmured, almost laughing. You'd wear my cast-offs? I held her gaze. If General Renard still seeks our family's alliance, does it matter through which daughter? The resemblance will keep tongues from wagging too much. Father looked at me then as if seeing me for the first time. You'd do this willingly? I would, I told him. And I meant it. Celeste's laughter came like glass shattering. Go on then. Perhaps you'll enjoy wearing my shadow. Her cruelty didn't wound me anymore, it only sharpened my decision. I was done living overlooked. Within days, the house filled with chaos. Matchmakers came and went. Servants unpacked silk bolts and polished jewelry. Mother fretted over auspicious dates. Everyone whispered behind their sleeves, she's taking her sister's place, half in awe, half in scandal. The jade hairpin, once a sign of Celeste's arrogance, now sat in my bridal chest. I didn't wear it out of imitation, but inheritance. Proof that what my sister had dismissed could become my future. The wedding was magnificent, a spectacle that lit up the whole city. Nobles, generals, merchants all came dressed in shimmering silks. Music poured through the courtyard like wind through bamboo, and hundreds of lanterns glowed like captured suns. But even with all the splendor around me, I could feel the weight of it all: my sister's silent bitterness, my family's ambition, my own daring. Celeste stood to the side, dressed in pale silk, smiling the way people do when they're trying not to show how much something hurts. Outwardly gracious, inwardly burning. For once, I felt the strange power of being the one seen instead of her. When Renard arrived, the whole crowd stilled. Astride a white stallion, he looked every inch the hero in stories, his armor gleaming, his expression unreadable. When his eyes met mine, something shifted: recognition, maybe, or resignation. He gave one quiet nod, sealing whatever unspoken understanding passed between us. The vows were given, the cups raised. His hand, rough from battle, brushed mine, and I felt the steadiness of a man who built his life on discipline. I wasn't marrying for love, not yet, at least. I was marrying for something I'd spent my life chasing, a future entirely my own. But life, as always, has a taste for irony. Before the wedding banquet even ended, before the last toast was offered, a messenger from the imperial court stormed in. Renard's orders were read aloud, summoning him back to the frontier. Effective immediately. The empire needed its general once more. And so, just like that, my husband, my victory, my choice was already being pulled away to war. The announcement hit the hall like thunder. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. I stood frozen, the perfume on my sleeves heavy as the silence that followed. Renard's armor gleamed under the candlelight as he turned to me, his expression steady but softened by a trace of regret. Forgive me, he said quietly. Duty waits for no man's pleasure. And before I could even think of what to say, he was gone, boots echoing down the stone path, cloak trailing like the end of a promise. The musicians hesitated, their flutes wilting into discord before falling still. One by one, the candles guttered. The whispers began soft, doubtful, merciless. By dawn, the feast lay in ruins, overturned cups, trampled flowers, the faint scent of smoke clinging to silk. I didn't move. The first light caught the jade hairpin in my hair, turning it pale gold. That morning, I realized something: I'd married a man made of steel and silence. But I had also stepped into a life that belonged to no one but me. When daylight finally broke across the drapes, too bright, too cruel, I sat by the window and listened to the city breathe. The red curtains still swayed with last night's wind, soaked in the scent of spent wine and melted wax. The ceremony was over. The guests were gone. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, Renard, my husband for only a handful of hours, was already riding north toward the frontier, called away by the emperor's seal. Our marriage had ended before it had even begun. The house echoed with an unfamiliar quiet. Servants avoided my eyes as they tidied what was left of celebration. I caught a glimpse of Mother weeping into her sleeve, whispering that the emperor's favor must protect us. Father kept his composure, though I saw it in his face, the uncertainty twisting beneath his pride. He had gained a war hero for a son-in-law. But what did that make me? A wife bound not by love or partnership, but by distance and duty. My new home, the mansion Renard had built for us, was magnificent. Vast courtyards, carved gates, gardens blooming with peonies and wisteria that cascaded like clouds. Gold doors engraved with his family crest gleamed like mirrors of ambition. But no matter how grand the halls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was only guarding someone else's legacy. Days melted into a rhythm, a calm, calculated kind of order. Each morning, I oversaw the servants' ledgers, the expenses, the deliveries from his estate. Renard's habits were everywhere: precision, discipline, perfection carved into every list. His steward, old Zhang, a mild man with silver eyebrows, looked surprised when he realized I could not only read the accounts but critique them. "My lady has an eye for numbers," he said once, bowing. "I have an eye for survival," I replied, smiling faintly. The first letter arrived after a few weeks, sealed in wax, scented faintly of smoke and iron. His handwriting was sharp, impatient, but beautiful in its own way. He wrote that the northern winds had come early and the terrain was harsher than expected, but that victory was inevitable. In another, shorter letter, he added a line that made me pause: "The nights are cold. Buy a fox fur coat. And do not touch my iron sword." I remember laughing softly when I read it. Trust a soldier to think of his weapon and his wife in the same breath. But hidden in those spare, practical words was something almost tender care disguised as command. His sword hung in the study, displayed like a relic. The blade, wrapped in a steel blue scabbard, seemed to breathe with its own quiet life. I would find myself standing before it sometimes, tracing the line of its engraving, wondering if the man who wielded it ever looked at me with the same focus, with the same reverence. Meanwhile, the city began to talk. The capital always needed stories, and mine was convenient: the general's absent bride playing mistress of his empty palace. I had dismissed his singing girls, replaced his young cooks with old nursemaids who ran the kitchen like a temple. They were cheaper, disciplined, loyal. Practical choices, yet somehow, practicality earned me a reputation. "They say the lady stinks of coin," one court woman laughed behind her fan during a tea gathering. "She runs her husband's mansion like a counting house." Let them talk. They'd never known what it was to build success instead of inherit it. Things remained calm until Celeste returned. She came in a faded carriage, her once golden paint dulled, her maid carrying a parasol that had clearly known better years. My sister stepped into the courtyard wearing a mended skirt, but her pride, oh, that remained polished and whole. "How are you, sister?" she asked sweetly, voice smooth as honey and sharp as a blade. "Still dusting treasures and counting your coins?" I smiled. "If I am, then at least I have coins to count." Her eyes glimmered. "They say your scent isn't jasmine anymore, but silver." "A better perfume than debt," I replied. Her smile faltered just slightly. "We can't all live by ledgers, Chinguang. Some of us prefer poetry to profit." "And yet," I said, lowering my fan, "poetry doesn't pay for silk, does it?" Our words skimmed the surface like koi in still water, beautiful, tense, every movement hiding danger beneath. Once, we'd been two halves of the same laughter. Now, we stood across an invisible line drawn by privilege and pride. Later, I learned that her husband, that delicate scholar she had chosen with such certainty, had brought her nothing but disappointment. Their wealth was slipping away, their parties growing small, their admirers fickle. The same salons that used to hang on her every syllable now whispered about her decline and my rise. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, what I felt was colder, a flicker of pity wrapped in recognition. Pride, I was learning, was just another kind of hunger. Still, I moved forward. Dawn after dawn, I walked through those sunlit halls filled with the gleam of jade, silk, and carved wood, a kingdom built from someone else's absence and my endurance. I was no longer waiting for Renard. I was simply becoming. The nights were the hardest. The wind ghosted through the lattice windows, rattling the candle flames. I would sit by the fire, rereading his letters, the ones smudged with soot or singed at the edges. His words were never tender, but they were steady. Be cautious. Keep the guards rotated. Do not answer unknown messengers. Little laws of loyalty wrapped in brief sentences. I would trace each line with my fingertips, wondering what kind of heart writes of swords but sends money for fur. What kind of man fights a war yet remembers the chill of his wife's skin? Somewhere in that thought, loneliness softened into something else. Not love yet, but interest. Maybe affection doesn't begin with longing, maybe it begins with patience. And so, I began to build. Not just a home, but an empire. It started one afternoon with a letter sealed in pale blue wax, a color I knew too well. The servant who delivered it looked nervous, glancing anywhere but my face. The handwriting was unmistakable, Celeste's. Graceful, perfect, deliberate as always. Dearest sister, it read. I hear your mansion sparkles brighter than ever. I hope your treasures keep you warm while you wait for your husband's return. Polite. Poisoned. Every word soaked in the same old envy. I crumpled the letter and dropped it straight into the brazier, watching elegant ink twist into smoke. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done binding us together. Not 2 weeks later, Celeste appeared again at my gates unannounced, uninvited. She stepped down from her carriage, quiet but proud, her once bright silks now dulled to pale lotus hues. The wooden hairpin in her hair looked worn, polished smooth from too many touches. And yet, somehow, she still glowed fragile and furious beneath her calm. My dear Chinguang, she said, smiling with that gentle cruelty I knew too well, you look radiant. The scent of gold suits you. And the years, I replied sweetly, have taught you simplicity. It suits you too. Her eyes flickered for a moment. She recovered quickly, of course. We sat together by the lotus pond, the same place we once shared childhood secrets. The air between us was tight with everything unsaid. I heard you dismissed the general singers, she began, idly stirring her tea. A shame. Their music gave these halls refinement. I prefer silence, I said. It leaves more room for thought. And you replaced the cooks with nursemaids? Efficient, she mused. You truly have made moderation your empire. Efficiency, I said, smiling, is its own form of conquest. Our conversation glittered with civility, every sentence carrying a hidden blade. Then her gaze landed on my hair, on the jade hairpin gleaming softly in the sunlight. That pin, she started, voice almost breaking. Ah, I said, touching it lightly. An heirloom. A wedding gift. I find it suits me better than it ever did you. Her cup trembled. Everything suits you, she said softly, when it's bought with someone else's love. Her words cut, but I didn't flinch. Then perhaps, I said, you should have loved more wisely, sister. Silence fell thick and sharp. Finally, she stood, smoothing her faded skirt. You think gold can wash away the scent of trade, she murmured. But no matter how high you climb, you'll never belong among those born to grace. And yet, I said, rising to face her, those born to grace now borrow from merchants like me. Her face stilled only for a moment, but it was enough. She turned and left without another word. Not long after, the servants brought rumors. Celeste's household was collapsing. Her scholar husband had lost their savings in bad investments. She was selling her dowry piece by piece, dignity unraveling one pearl at a time. That evening, curiosity, or perhaps something darker, led me to a pawnshop in the quieter district. I wore a veil and gave no name. The shopkeeper showed me a hairpin, delicate, gilded, carved with lotus filigree. A noble lady sold this, he said, unaware of what he'd revealed. Fine work. desperation sale. And as the lantern light glowed against its surface, I felt something twist deep in my chest. Triumph, pity, and the strange ache of remembering who she once was and who I had become. I bought it without hesitation. That hairpin had been Celeste's, our mother's wedding gift to her, a token once meant to pass down grace, not envy. When I brought it home, I placed it on my desk between ledgers and imported curios, where the gold caught the candlelight. It gleamed steadily, quietly like a crown reclaimed. Weeks later, I attended a poetry gathering. Not as a spectator this time, but as someone the room now orbited around. The same society that once snubbed me now sent invitations wrapped in compliments, laced with curiosity and calculation. I was the patron, now the name that funded their ink, their paper, their dreams. Celeste was there, too. Dressed simply, her eyes sharp but dimmer than before. She no longer looked like the goddess of spring everyone once adored, more like a relic of a forgotten age. That night, she read one of her poems. It spoke of fading blossoms, empty halls, and the quiet dignity of a dying flame. The audience wept softly, touched by her fragility. Even I clapped, sincerely. Because despite everything, her scorn, her fall, her words still had beauty. But when I approached her afterward, she didn't thank me. She looked at me as if I were a ghost that had consumed her reflection. "You must be proud," she said, her voice trembling between fury and heartbreak. "To see me stand small in a hall you purchased." "Not proud," I said softly. "Just aware of how things change." For a breath, I thought she might cry. But Celeste had never been one to break where others could see. She only turned away, spine stiff, pride intact. The poets, smelling blood and ambition, shifted their loyalties overnight. They laughed too loudly at my jokes, flattered my discerning taste, compared my patronage to divine blessing. They told me I was restoring art through enterprise. I smiled and accepted it all, even knowing their praises were hollow. Flattery, like profit, still held value if you knew how to spend it. But that night, when the applause faded and the lanterns went dark, I caught sight of the gilded hairpin again, sitting on my desk. The little object seemed to mock me, its gleam half triumph, half ghost. Celeste's laughter, her elegance, her biting words, they had shaped me far more than I'd ever admit. Without her, I might have remained gentle, invisible. Her arrogance had forged my ambition into steel. And even though I told myself I'd won, I knew the truth: between sisters, victory was never clean. It was always a wound neatly bandaged, always threatening to reopen. The first time I held the keys to my own business, honest iron keys, heavy and cold in my palm, I felt something deeper than happiness. It was power, yes, but quieter. The kind that breathed beneath your skin. These locks, these ledgers, these signatures, they were proof that I'd built something mine. Renard's warehouses had been my first crucible, crates of silk, stacks of spices, mountains of forgotten tribute. Everyone saw clutter, I saw capital. I turned chaos into charts, and charts into gold. When word reached me that foreign traders would pay fortunes for red pearls from the western colonies, I acted swiftly, using father's old contacts as my bridge. The returns were dazzling. Within a year, I had 3 thriving ventures: a tea house where ministers and scholars debated policy over my imported brews, a textile shop famed for blending noble patterns with merchant sensibility, and a discreet bank that lent to nobles too proud to admit their debts. None bore my name, but all bore my imprint. Whispers began to follow me through the capital. "The general's wife," they said, "has the mind of a minister." Others were less kind. "She's turned the general's mansion into a counting hall." They were both right, and I didn't correct either. Renard's letters arrived less frequently now, each one smelling faintly of smoke. Short, precise messages inked in the same clipped tone: "Secure the accounts. Trust no one who flatters too easily. The emperor favors endurance." Beneath those military rhythms, I read something more: respect. He trusted me to guard not just his home, but his name. It was the kind of partnership he might have offered a fellow officer. And in an odd way, I cherished that. The wealth poured in like a tide. Our gates gleamed, our storerooms grew full. And yet, with abundance came teeth. Courtiers who once brushed past me now courted my favor with sugared words and false laughter. Father, who once dismissed my mercantile curiosity, now introduced me proudly as Madame Chinguang, wife of the empire's favored general, provider to half its nobility. Everyone wanted something. Silver clinks louder than poetry. Celeste, meanwhile, faded further into rumor. Her husband's ventures failed spectacularly, publishing houses, art circles, hollow promises. Debts piled high. I heard she'd sold nearly everything that once was hers. Silks, heirlooms, even the embroidery our mother had made when we were children. One afternoon, I saw her at the market. She stood before a cloth vendor, haggling quietly over a roll of plain linen. The fabric was cheap, coarse. But her back was straight, her voice even. Our eyes met across a sea of noise and color. For a moment, the years dissolved. We were children again, both proud, both pretending we weren't. Still buying for others? I asked gently. I buy what suits my means, she said. I don't need the world's applause to know my worth. Maybe she believed it. Or maybe she just needed to say it to survive. That night, my house glowed like a fortress of light, clerks counting revenue, servants preparing contracts for sealing. The hum of prosperity. Yet amid the sound of wealth, I caught something hollow. Maybe it was just the echo of my own solitude. Mother visited often then. She would trail her fingers along the ledgers, eyes soft with equal parts wonder and confusion. Your father once chased titles, she said. You chase numbers. Yet the fire looks the same. I do what's necessary, I told her. Her smile was slow, knowing. Be careful, my child. What we call necessary often becomes destiny. Her words stayed with me. I began to see how ambition, like gold, loses its luster when too often touched. Every triumph fed hunger instead of peace. But I couldn't stop. Even contentment felt like surrender. By spring, I had founded a merchant guild of my own, an alliance bound by coin and loyalty, its seal a phoenix rising from a chest of treasure. Through them, my trade caravans moved farther than any soldier's march, silk and salt across provinces, jewels across borders. The empire turned on wheels I had helped set in motion. One envoy bowed deeply upon delivery of the season's returns. Madam Chinguang, he said, there is no market you cannot enter, no purse you cannot open. Flattering words, but also dangerous ones. The capital's nobility tolerated my presence out of necessity. They bought my silk, borrowed from my banks, toasted my name, then mocked it behind closed fans. I knew this, but it amused me. After all, mockery is safest when spoken by those already indebted. When winter returned, Renard's mansion glittered. The servants wore velvet, the storerooms overflowed. My empire had caught the city's pulse. And yet, on the quietest of nights, I would look at the other half of my bed and wonder what my absent husband would think if he walked through that door today. Would he recognize me? Would he see the same woman he'd left behind, or a stranger crowned in coin and cunning? The question lingered on the frost-filled air, unanswered. Beyond the mountains, his war still raged. And here, in his absence, I was waging my own. By the time my name started appearing in poetry journals, I couldn't help but laugh. I hadn't written a single line, yet the poets credited me for reviving the soul of art through patronage. How ironic that the woman once laughed out of salons now financed them all. The luminous pavilion had been Celeste's world once. Her throne of incense and verse, her court of admirers hung on every word. Now, her audience had turned fickle, their sympathies spiced with gossip. Poor Lady Celeste, they murmured. Once a muse, now a memory. I hadn't set out to steal her crown. But power, once tasted, has a way of reaching. When one of the pavilion's treasurers approached, wringing his hands in worry over dwindling funds, I saw my chance. Madam Chinguang, he said, your generosity could restore our society to glory. I smiled. Support deserves acknowledgement. And soon enough, elegant invitations started carrying a new name among their patrons, Madam Chinguang of the Renard household. The merchant's daughter now etched into parchment beside noble seals. Celeste noticed. Of course, she did. At the pavilion's spring gathering, she arrived in white silk embroidered with tiny blossoms, a deliberate echo of her celebrated debut. The crowd hushed as she turned, graceful as ever, her voice sweet but chilled with venom. What a surprise, sister, she said. I never dreamed our simple society would draw generals' wives. Nor did I replied, smiling. But who knew cultured company could be so profitable? Laughter rippled through the hall. Celeste's eyes glinted. You always did measure beauty in coin. And you always measured coin in beauty, I said softly. Perhaps that's why yours ran out first. The silence that followed was delicious. The nobles practically leaned in, delighted at the duel. After that night, the feud spilled beyond polite words. Poets once loyal to Celeste began crafting biting verses mocking the merchant empress, the lady with coins for feathers. Their wit was clever, cruel, intoxicating to the crowd. At first, I laughed. Mockery, like wine, can sweeten your name if you know when to sip it. But when whispers reached me that Celeste herself had commissioned some of those poems, my amusement sharpened to anger. So, I invited them all to supper. The great hall shimmered that night, bathed in gold light and perfumed with jasmine wine. The poets, scholars, and nobles arrived one after another, their voices laced with the same curiosity and condescension. They expected an apology cloaked in hospitality, some wounded woman trying too hard to please. Instead, they found me waiting dressed not in glittering stones, but in quiet confidence. Dinner unfolded amid laughter and speculation. I smiled, poured wine, let the tension hum beneath the music. When cups were full and tongues loosened, I rose slowly, the silk of my dress whispering against the floor. Friends, I began, my voice calm but cutting through the chatter, I have always admired poets more than merchants. You deal in words while we deal in coin. And isn't it true words shape the world far more subtly than silver ever could? They murmured in polite agreement, half tipsy, half uncertain. I let the pause breathe just long enough before I continued, turning toward the poets who had mocked me in print. But tell me, I said lightly, which is the greater art, to weave illusions for applause, or to turn silver into sustenance? To trade flattery for coin that feeds children, funds printing presses, and keeps your verses alive? Laughter flickered, nervous, uneasy. The kind people make when they aren't sure if they're being teased or measured. I propose a challenge, I said, smiling. For 3 months, each poet here will sell their art as I sell my wares. Let words earn as much gold as merchandise. And when the season ends, whoever earns the most shall win this. I gestured to a lacquered box set upon a small cushion. Gasps rippled through the room as servants lifted the lid. Inside, gleamed a perfect jade brush washer, a relic from Renard's personal collection, smooth, luminous, priceless. A scholar's dream. This, I said softly, is the prize of industry. The poets blinked at one another, pride stoking their ambition. Challenges stirred like embers, wagers whispered between cups. Even Celeste, who had said nothing, inclined her head ever so slightly, pride demanding she not appear afraid. Those 3 months turned the city into a stage. Poets peddled verses like merchants haggling in markets. Their scrolls appeared in tea houses, their stanzas printed in pamphlets handed to passers-by. Some managed meager profits. Most, none at all. By the season's end, we gathered once more in that same golden hall. The jade box lay waiting, unopened. I asked, one by one, how their ventures fared. Even before the first answer, I knew the outcome. Their earnings, combined, barely equaled the cost of the banquet I had hosted for them. I opened the box. The jade caught the candlelight, silent and pure. Talent, I said softly, is priceless, but influence decides what it's worth. No one dared reply. Even Celeste's lips parted, only to close again. Her composure trembled, but her pride held. Later, when the guests had gone and only candle smoke lingered between us, she approached. Your cleverness, she said quietly, borders on cruelty. Cruelty, I replied, is merely honesty stripped of its elegance. After that night, the society was never the same. The poets who once mocked me now sought my patronage. The ladies who once shunned me now offered titles and seats beside them. My name, once tainted by trade, began to sound like legacy. Celeste, meanwhile, faded again, retreating behind the fragile walls of pride and debt. Her husband's failures weighed like stones around her neck. And though I should have felt vindicated, I found myself haunted. Late at night, when the mansion fell silent, I'd catch myself staring at the jade hairpin or the brush washer's reflection, icons of victory, and wonder why triumph felt like loss wearing perfume. Perhaps the poets were right when they called me a merchant of emotions. Maybe I did measure life in profits. But in their inability to sell truth, they proved me right. Even art bends before survival. And still, despite all the bitterness, there were moments when I missed the sound of Celeste's laughter, missed the girl she once was before envy turned it brittle. There had been beauty in her poetry once before pride devoured it. Then, one morning, the messenger came. His boots left a trail of frost across the marble floor, the imperial seal glinting in his hand. I didn't need the words to know what it meant. Change was coming. General Renard, he announced, voice echoing across the hall, has completed his northern campaign. Victorious under the emperor's blessing, he is recalled to the capital. For 2 years, our marriage had existed through ink and parchment. Now, the man behind those letters, the soldier of patience and command, was returning. The household erupted. Servants rushed to dust tapestries, polish silver, prepare banquets. The city itself seemed to whisper his name. And yet, beneath my practiced calm, anxiety stirred like wind before rain. Absence had shaped our marriage into something I could control. His return would change the terms. That night, sleep refused me. I sat by the window, reading his letters by fading lamplight, those spare sentences full of discipline and restraint. Keep the accounts tidy. Do not fear solitude. Beneath their austerity beat something steady, almost tender. I had learned to translate his silence long ago. At dawn, the first tremor of trumpets rolled across the city. By the time I reached the courtyard, the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the streets. Banners of black and gold, Eldoria's northern colors, swept through the gate. And then he appeared. Renard looked older, sharper, his face marked softly by the ghosts of battle. The golden edge of youth had dulled into something stronger, quieter. His armor bore scratches like stories, and his presence filled the world around him, contained but immeasurable. He dismounted and handed off his sword. When he approached, we simply looked at each other. I, the woman forged from commerce and survival; he, the warrior refined by war and endurance. No words passed for a long time. Then he bowed slightly. "You've done well," he said, voice roughened by years of shouting commands. "Better than I had any right to expect." "I've had practice," I replied, managing a faint smile. That evening, the mansion overflowed with celebration. Ministers and generals toasted under the red lanterns. Celeste came, too uninvited, though no one dared turn her away. She wore modest silk, her fingertips adorned with old jewelry polished past its prime. In her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: longing. Her gaze lingered on Renard more than once. It was unmistakable, the flicker of regret, the ache of what she had thrown away. The realization hit like quiet lightning: for all her pride, she had begun to crave the very steadiness she once scorned. Renard noticed her, of course, but with the same controlled grace he carried into battle. A polite nod. Nothing more. But that small, measured gesture was enough to ignite her imagination again. Later that night, after the guests departed and silence folded over the house, Renard removed his gauntlets and set them beside the fire. "You've changed," he said quietly. "As have you," I replied. He studied the room, the ledgers, the neatly arranged treasures, the polished order of wealth. "When I married you, I thought you fragile," he said at last. "I was wrong. Delicacy," I told him, "doesn't survive absence." He gave a faint, tired smile. "Then you've survived beautifully." His sincerity caught me off guard. For the first time, I felt something between us, ease and understanding neither of us had asked for, but both had earned. That night, we shared a silence that felt almost like peace. In the days that followed, our household adjusted to the rhythm of two leaders under one roof. He commanded with authority, I balanced it with reason. His soldiers obeyed his discipline, my servants followed my order. Together, we learned coexistence, the sword and the silver sharing one sovereign space. But harmony, in my family, was always a flower that wilted quickly. Celeste returned more often under the brittle excuse of visiting mother. Each time, her visits lingered longer. She smiled too warmly, asked too many polite questions. I saw the way she looked at Renard like a poet before a lost muse. He remained courteous but distant, unaware or simply unwilling to feed her hope. Jealousy, that old poison, stirred in me nonetheless. One evening, after she left, Renard noticed my silence. "You don't trust easily," he said gently. "Trust," I told him, "is a coin that spends too quickly." He tilted his head, considering. "Not every debt begins with deceit." I wanted to believe him. Yet Celeste's shadow followed me like a persistent echo. Finally, mother intervened. Her voice trembled with both love and exhaustion. "Enough," she said one afternoon. "You've both suffered enough. Let the past return to silence. You are sisters. Let the family find peace." Peace. Such a fragile word. We nodded, for her sake. But deep inside, I knew better. Peace can only exist where pride allows it, and neither of us had learned how to let pride rest. Still, in the quiet moments with Renard, his hand resting warm over mine as we studied maps and contracts by the fire, I felt something close to contentment. Not the fever of romance Celeste once dreamed of, but the steady rhythm of partnership. Two people bonded by endurance rather than desire. When I looked into his amber eyes flickering with the same firelight that had reflected off his blade, I realized sometimes, affection's shadow lasts longer than its light. And just when I thought that fragile calm might hold, Father shattered it. It happened at a dinner meant for reconciliation. The table stretched long, silverware gleaming, food untouched beneath all the politeness. Celeste arrived with her scholar husband, who looked haunted by his errors and her disappointment. They sat opposite us, their smiles taut. Renard's quiet authority anchored the room at first. But then Father, ever blunt, poured wine and broke the silence. "I haven't seen your husband's verses in the journals lately," he said to Celeste, his tone deceptively casual. "Has the world run out of inspiration?" It was a spark over dry wood. Celeste's voice turned cool. "Not everyone chases fame, Father. Some of us prefer quiet dignity." Father chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, dignity, such a fragile profession. And yet, merchants in general seem to achieve more in silence than poets do in all their noise." The room stilled. Even the fire seemed to fade to a flicker. The warmth of peace was gone. And in that charged quiet, I realized we were never building peace. Only loading the next volley. Her gaze slid toward me, cool, precise, as if forged from the edge of her pride. "So I've been told," she murmured. "Profit and praise often dine together." Mother's fingers trembled as she set her chopsticks down. "Please," she whispered, "let's not reopen wounds tonight." Under the table, Renard's hand brushed mine, a silent warning restraint. But my patience had weathered too many storms to bow again. "At least," I said evenly, "I've learned to fill ledgers instead of shelves with debt papers." The words settled like stones. Celeste stiffened, her husband, Scholar Juan, shrunk beside her, gaze falling to his cup. Even the servants froze mid-step. Celeste's voice dropped to a hiss sharp enough to cut porcelain. "Your tongue grows sharper with coin. Do you measure even blood and profit now, Chinguang?" I met her stare, unblinking. "I measure worth," I said quietly. "And you, sister, taught me what waste looks like." That might have been the end of it, if Father hadn't slammed his cup against the table. The sound cracked the air like thunder. "Enough," he thundered. "You shame your mother's house with this pettiness. Have the gods not given us enough? Must my daughters claw at each other like market women squabbling over scraps?" The hall fell silent, only the faint hiss of candle wax filling the pause. Even Renard, unshakable as ever, bowed his head out of respect for my father's fury. Celeste's eyes gleamed with unshed tears, once her greatest weapon, now stripped of their power. "You always loved her more," she whispered bitterly. "Even when I carried our name with grace while she hid in your shadow." Father's sigh was not that of guilt, but exhaustion. "Celeste," he said wearily, "I loved you both. But you mistook pride for purpose. Chinguang may trade, but she built something lasting. Can you say the same?" Celeste rose, her chair scraping hard against the floor, an accusation-given sound. "You speak of lasting?" she spat. "I built beauty. I gave our family culture, admiration. And now you all kneel before gold." Her voice cracked, the tremor raw and human. "Enjoy your banquet, my generals and merchants," she said, trembling. "I will not partake in crumbs bought with shame." She turned sharply and swept out, Juan trailing behind her, small, wilted, apologetic. The door closed behind them with a slam that echoed long after she was gone. Mother pressed her sleeve to her face. "Your father meant no cruelty," she murmured, though her tears belied her words. But cruelty had already sewn itself into our family, an old thread, frayed and impossible to pull free. After dinner, Renard followed Father into the courtyard. I stayed to clear dishes with Mother, the silence between us thick but tender. Outside, their voices carried softly through the paper screens. "She will not forgive you," Renard said. "Some wounds only deepen with silence." Father exhaled heavily. "I should have mended things long ago. But how does a man choose between pride and peace?" Renard's answer came, calm and thoughtful, by deciding which legacy he prefers. When they returned, Father seemed smaller somehow, bent under years of authority that now felt like weight instead of power. That night, Renard and I sat by the window, watching the lanterns gutter out one by one. He poured plum wine, the soft scent filling the quiet. She resents you, he said at last. Because you hold what she can't reclaim. But she also loves you, though she'll never say it aloud. Her bitterness, it's just love, twisted out of shape. I watched the flame reflected in the wine's surface. Then love is a cruel sculptor, I murmured. Perhaps, he said, his eyes on me. But even cruelty can mold strength. You're proof of that. Outside, a breeze swept through the courtyard, carrying echoes of laughter long gone, Celeste's laughter, from our youth. I saw us again, two little girls by the lily pond, weaving jasmine into our hair and whispering promises of forever. Now, forever looked like this, divided by pride, bound by blood. That night, I dreamt of a house split in two, one half gold and order, the other poetry and dust. Each fragile without the other, both surviving only because of their shared foundation. When I woke to the gray dawn, the image lingered. Families break not when love dies, I realized, but when pride refuses to bow before it. Peace didn't stay long. It never did. In the weeks that followed, unease began to gather around me. At first, it was whispers, shadowed faces near my gates, unfamiliar merchants in the marketplace asking too many questions. Then rumors surfaced, someone was targeting my caravans. The first real warning came from Boss Chu, the opera singer I'd sponsored into fame. His courier brought a simple note, sealed with a smudge of powder and a hint of urgency: "Be cautious, madam. Not all envy sings in rhyme." Days later, the meaning became clear. One of my merchant wagons carrying silk and silver under Renard's own crest was ambushed outside the city. The driver barely escaped. The looter spoke fluent Eldorian. This wasn't random banditry. Someone inside the capital wanted me undone. When Renard returned from the barracks that evening, I told him everything. He listened in silence, leaning over a table cluttered with war maps and soldier reports, his face unreadable under lamplight. "You knew this would come one day," he said finally. "Gold breeds enemies faster than honor." "These aren't thieves," I said. "They knew routes, schedules, details no outsider could guess. Someone close is feeding them." His hand settled on the map, heavy and deliberate. "Then leave this to me." I shook my head. "No. This touches my name, my trade. I will not retreat into silence just because the danger feels convenient." He studied me for a long moment, eyes softened by reluctant admiration. Then he nodded. "I married a woman of strength. And strength doesn't wait behind walls. We hunted the truth together." He deployed spies under false orders, I tracked debt trails through forged ledgers. It didn't take long for the puzzle to take shape, a web of nobles, debts, and whispers, all leading back to the same figure, Lord Su, patron of the luminous pavilion. A man who owed half the city money and the other half favors. When I confronted Boss Chu, his powdered face went pale. "They asked me to spread tales," he confessed in a trembling voice. "To say you bought power with bribes. That you seduced officials, tainted the general's name. Lies meant to stain your reputation." "Who paid you?" I asked. He hesitated only a moment. "Lord Su. He said artists should serve those who appreciate beauty over profit." A faint smile touched my lips. "He confuses beauty with indulgence and profit with survival." Soon after, the danger turned real. That meeting by Riverside Alley was meant to seal funding for Chu's new opera pavilion, a peaceful evening of contracts and conversation. But halfway through, we heard the shouting outside, the unmistakable clamor of violence. Before anyone could react, the doors burst open. Masked men. Swords drawn. Fire in their hands. Chaos exploded. Tables overturned, tea splattered, someone screamed. One assassin lunged straight for me. I braced for pain, then froze as he went rigid, a blade jutting clean through his chest. Renard stood behind him. His movements were quick, precise, the kind of deadly grace only decades of survival can sculpt. Within moments, the fight was over. The air reeked of blood and smoke. He turned to me, breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" "No," I whispered. "But you, how?" "I followed your messenger," he said, voice still steady. "My instincts told me not to trust anyone else's." Afterward came the investigations. The Emperor's own guards uncovered enough evidence to strip Lord Su of rank and wealth, his family scattered into exile. Yet even as justice was done, I sensed deeper unrest stirring beneath the city's polished calm. Renard grew quieter as our power grew wider, his gaze more watchful, his touch gentler but rarer. Rumors sprouted like spring weeds, tales of the Iron General and the Jade Lady, two names whispered in admiration and fear. Together, we had become the capital's most formidable alliance, his sword, my silver. But shadows always return. Celeste, fueled by resentment, began weaving poisonous rumors of her own. She whispered in tea parlors and salons, said the attack had been staged to win Renard's sympathy. That I had purchased heroism with gold. Mother begged me not to listen. I only smiled. Forgiveness, I said softly, is given only to those who still matter. And yet, my armor trembled. Because sometimes, in the dead of night, I still heard her laughter, distant, childish, innocent. One evening, Renard caught me by the window again, staring into the sleeping city. He fastened his sword belt, ready for a late patrol. The higher we climb, he said gently, the lonelier the air. Power always thins the crowd. He took my hand, his calloused fingers warm, steady. But you are not alone, Chinguang. Not while I draw breath. And in that instant, I believed him. That night, for the first time in years, I slept not as a merchant or strategist but simply as a woman who, against all odds, had found certainty. The city beyond our gates still seethed and schemed. But within our walls, there was strength. And strength rooted in loyalty, not love, was the rarest peace I had ever known. The year Renard returned marked the start of our legend. The years that followed would crown it and test it far beyond glory. Together, we commanded two empires, his built on loyalty and steel, mine on coin and cunning. Across Eldoria, they called us the Iron General and the Lady of Gold. Yet titles never told the truest story. He had fought for glory. I had fought for survival. And the world had begun to realize there was little difference between the two. I had fought for survival. And yet, together, Renard and I forged something far beyond survival, an empire that baffled poets and princes alike. Ours was not a dominion of bloodline or battlefield, but of patience, planning, and quiet endurance. A rule built not on thunder, but on silence that compelled attention. But every flame, no matter how golden, draws both warmth and shadow. Whispers began to stir again, soft, venomous. They said I had grown too ambitious. That my influence had tamed the general's will. That the empire itself could no longer tell where his command ended and mine began. I ignored them. Gossip wilts when ignored long enough. But when I learned Celeste had added her voice to the chorus, the old ache rose from its grave. My sister had fallen far by then. Her husband's debts had stripped them bare, land gone, servants dismissed, reputation spent. And yet she carried the same sharpness in her tongue, honed to perfection by disappointment. She's bought his loyalty, she whispered to those eager for scandal. Even love can be purchased, if the purse is heavy enough. Once, I might have laughed. But now, the court hung on such whispers, and Renard's influence stood at the center of imperial politics. Her words, once petty, had fangs. He saw my unease one quiet evening as we sat in the garden. The pond reflected the moon like silver trembling in water. She seeks to wound you, he said. But rumor is a dull sword, it cuts its wielder first. I gave a small smile. She doesn't want blood. She wants relevance. I built her prison, and she hates the silence inside it. He looked at me long and searching with that mix of pride and weariness he wore only when the world was quiet enough for honesty. You become stronger than anyone dared to predict, he said softly. But strength changes those who wield it. His words stayed with me. When he left again for the northern campaign, the farewell was harder than before. The sound of drums followed him beyond the gates, and the echo lingered deep inside me long after the army had vanished. Because now, for the first time, I understood something dangerous. I loved him completely. And love, when real, makes absence a kind of grief. Weeks later, a sealed letter arrived, imperial crest pressed into white wax. My breath caught. For a moment, I feared the worst. But when I broke the seal, the words were not of mourning. The emperor himself had summoned us to the winter court. On the day we entered the palace, snow glittered like powdered jade. I wore twilight blue brocade, plain but regal, a single jade girdle at my waist. Renard walked beside me, his uniform polished, his posture unyielding. When we stepped into the vast marble hall, conversation stilled. Nobles turned to watch. A warrior and a merchant's daughter, standing where lineage had once been law. Celeste was there, pale, elegant still, but brittle like porcelain at its edge. When her eyes met mine across the hall, what stared back was not hatred but desperation. The emperor, majestic in gold, raised his voice. He spoke of valor, of loyalty, of prosperity. He spoke of Renard's victories and of the wealth our ventures had poured into the empire's coffers. Eldoria, he declared, thrives when sword and commerce walk side by side. The general and his lady stand as proof that unity serves empire best. Applause filled the chamber, loud, unending. And in the sea of clapping hands, Celeste turned away, shoulders trembling. Later, as snow fell thick in the imperial courtyard, she found me alone. Her breath clouded the air between us. "You have everything," she whispered. "Money, power, devotion. And still, you look at me as if I'm the thief." "Perhaps," I said after a beat, "because you took what can't be bought back, peace." For a moment, the bitterness in her eyes softened, replaced by something fragile and human. Then she smiled slow, sad, the echo of a sister long gone. "You've won," she murmured. "But tell me, truthfully, does victory keep you warm? Or does it only remind you how cold the peak can be?" She left before I could answer, her form vanishing into the whirling snow, leaving only the faint print of her steps behind. Renard found me standing there in silence. "You pity her," he said gently. "Yes," I admitted. "But pity," I added, "is just grief wearing armor." He reached for me, his hand warm against the chill. "Then let grief rest," he said. "We've carried enough ghosts." That winter changed us both. For the first time, I stopped measuring worth in profit or power. Our ventures thrived regardless, but I no longer chased them. We spent evenings by the hearth, talking not of war or trade but of quieter dreams, places we might see if peace ever came, things we might have done had fate been kinder sooner. The rumors eventually withered. The nobles found new scandals, as nobles always do. The merchants grew rich, the poets found new patrons. And the city forgot how loudly it had once doubted me. When spring came, I walked through gardens I had planted myself. No jewels, no retinue, just the sound of wind through blossoms. For the first time in many years, my hands bore no rings, my heart no resentment. Celeste, they said, had taken ill. Her husband had fled, debts chaining her to the ruins of her own pride. I sent her gold, medicine, comfort. She sent them all back. Pride was her last possession, and perhaps, in that final stubbornness, she and I were not so different after all. By summer's end, Renard and I returned north. Our mansion overlooked the green hills that rolled into the distance. Once, I'd resented its grandeur, felt caged by its walls. Now it felt like shelter, the kind that didn't imprison, only enclosed what mattered. Most nights, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. We would sit side by side, watching the lanterns drift across the water, two reflections, neither brighter than the other. Someday, perhaps, poets will tell our story. They'll romanticize the battlefields, the wealth, the loyalty that outlasted envy. They'll pretend it was all passion, the Iron General and the Lady of Gold. But they'll never understand the truth. Love, real love, is not forged in desire. It's carved slowly in endurance, in forgiveness, in the shared silences between storms. As for Celeste, her name faded with the seasons, becoming rumor, then memory, then little more than a sigh carried by the wind. Yet sometimes, I still dream of her. Of that summer long ago, her laughter ringing by the pond as we braided jasmine into each other's hair and promised we'd never let the world divide us. Maybe, somewhere beyond this life, she keeps that promise still. Renard often says victory always demands a price. He's right. But looking now at all we'd built, the empire, the peace, the quiet rhythm of our days, I see that the cost, steep as it was, has lost its bitterness. Because in this twilight, our twilight, I've learned something I never found in fortune or favor. The truest conquest is not power, not revenge, not legacy. It is stillness. And my heart, once restless, is finally still.
If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more tales from Sparrow's Realm. Until next time, keep listening and let your imagination soar.